All right, today we're going to be talking about number lines and absolute value. So, first off, what is absolute value? On the test, they're going to have two straight up and down lines. Anything that falls in between those lines, what they're wanting is the absolute value of that. So, what does absolute value line mean? It means the distance from 0. Just a little hint, it's always positive. Distance can never be negative. You can't be negative 2 feet away from somebody. You can only be 2 feet away from somebody. Now you can move in a negative fashion, but you can't be negative something away from something else. So if you have the absolute value lines, let's say you have absolute value of 3. What they're saying is, what is the distance away from 0 that 3 is? So if you had a number line, which we're going to talk about later, it's 0 in the middle, some negatives on that side. So you've got 3 right there. So what you would count is your gaps. So 1, 2, 3. So you are 3 away from 0. Now that seems like it's obvious, but when it's not obvious is when they start getting into negatives. For example, that. So they'll say the absolute value of -4. So on a number line, it would look like this. So what they're wanting is you to just count the gaps. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is 4 away from 0. Like I said, the answer is always positive. So if the answer is already positive, your answer is just going to be the same. If your answer is negative, you're going to turn it positive. Now, there's a reason for that. We're not going to go over it today, and you might not even go over it for the GED, but this is preparing you for college. For certain equations, especially when they're talking about distance, you have to have a positive number. So when you end up with a negative number, you've got to turn it positive. That's what absolute value is used for. Now, sometimes you can have multiple numbers inside. For example, that. When you've got multiple numbers inside the absolute value signs, you've got to solve what's inside first before you turn it positive. So if you remember your positive and negative rules, or you have a calculator, sometimes you will, sometimes you won't for these. If it has the same sign, which means a negative in front of the 5 and a negative in front of the 6, then you're going to be adding these together. So 5 and 6 is 11, and you keep the negative. Bring down the absolute value signs. Probably shouldn't have used that example because of all the straight lines. There you go. So then you determine the absolute value of -11, and that is 11. And the reason why it matters that you solve it first is if you have something like this. So a lot of people will want to turn everything inside positive first. So they'll say, well, I'll just get rid of that negative and make it 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. That would be incorrect. So if you solve this first, -6, you add 3 to it, you got different signs, so you actually subtract them, keep the sign of the larger number. So what they're really wanting to know is the absolute value of 3. We already determined above. That is just 3. Now on the GED, I've seen them do this. So draw a number line. I'll have 4 over there. Let's say they have -5 over here. And then they'll have something like this or something like that. Or an arrow or something. It'll say, what's the difference? Or they might even put dots. What's the difference between these two numbers? Now, it's easy to just start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and your answer would be 9. Sorry about that. But that's not what they want. For some reason, they want you to come up with an expression. And this is where people get confused. So they start with this number instead of starting with this number. So they put -5. Now, anytime you're wanting to know the distance between two numbers on a number line, what you're really wanting to find is the difference between those two numbers. And if you remember anything from word problems, difference always means subtract. So the difference between this number and this number makes it a subtraction problem. So they subtract +4, which also makes it confusing because it seems like you want to add because this is positive and this is negative. But this is negative because that has a negative in front of it. This is minus because you want to know the difference. But the problem is this isn't the answer because of what I said earlier. The distance between two numbers can never be negative. If you solve this just the way it is, you would get -9. So then they want you to realize that you need absolute value bars on both sides. So it'll be -5 minus 4, and that's just what they want. They want an expression. They don't want an answer or a one number answer. The real answer is 9, but they don't want 9. They want this. So we're going to try to cover that today. So first we're going to start just plotting numbers on a number line. And I thought it would be good to start with fractions because that is a different problem that you'll see on the TABE test or the GED, and that's plotting fractions on a number line. So these start with 0 and end with 1. Now if you count, what you're counting is you're counting the spaces. You're not counting the lines. And never start counting where you're at. So basically you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spaces. So when you're plotting these, they're just wanting 1/10. So you would go to the first space over, and then you would put A. That's it. So this one's divided into 4. Oops. This one's divided into 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll just do this one. 3/4 would be 1, 2, 3. And then you would put point B. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. You've got all the answers on the second sheet. You can practice that on your own. Negatives. Usually confusing because it's backwards. So you notice 0 is on the right hand side this time, and -1 is on the left hand side. So you're going backwards. So how many spaces are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some of these have 6 on the bottom, some of them have 3 on the bottom. That can be confusing because you're thinking, well, how does that work with a 3 when you just counted there are 6 over here? So let's just start with this D. So -1/6. So you would start at 0 and go to the left. So this is one space over. So that's -1/6. So that would be point D. So -5/6 would be 5 spots over. So you're starting here. When you go negative, you go left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So point C would be over here. Now here's where it can be a little confusing. -1/3. There's 2 ways to do this. One is just visualize 3 spaces. So you've got a space here that's equal, a space here that's equal, and then a space in the middle that's equal. So if you're jumping 2, you're going 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, which would be 1. Some people can't do that in their head. So the only way to do it is to convert it into an equivalent fraction with 6 on the bottom. Now, if you haven't been in my class, you'll have to watch something on fractions to see why you need to convert, but we convert fractions to equivalent fractions to be able to add them. So how do you turn 3 into 6? Multiply by 2. So you multiply the top by 2, and you get -2. So it's at negative 1/3 is actually -2/6. So you would go 1, 2 spots over. You'd have B. If you converted this, again, times 2 times 2, you'd have -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be point A. So again, do this on your own. Check your answers on the second sheet. We'll do a couple mixed numbers. So again, like I said, it's important to count your spaces in between, because if you look here, in between 1 and 2, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Your first answer has got a half. Now, a lot of people know where half is. It's right in the middle. But you might not know where. Oh, well, that's not a good example. I'll show you when we get later on. So half, if you wanted to convert it, times 2 again, 2/4. So it'd be, well, almost did it wrong because I didn't look at the whole number. Whole number is 3, so you're actually in between 3 and 4. I'll leave the rest of those. Let me find a good example. Here's a good example. So if you go up here and count, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces in between 4 and 5. And the first one you got has got a 4 on the bottom. So again, you have to turn that into 8. Multiply times 2. And you end up with 6/8. So you'd find 5 first. And then you move over 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that would be point A. Practice that on your own. This is just getting you used to absolute value. So it says, what is the value of A? You got an A over here. So again, I always start by counting the gaps. So in between 10 and 20, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, this is 2 gaps. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's kind of confusing because they go over the line that's normally right there. So each gap represents 1. So now I can actually solve. So you've got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So that is actually an 18. All right, so it says, what is the value of A? It's 18. How far is A from 0? And what they're trying to get used to is absolute value. So that would be 18. Now, I'm going to skip those because those are kind of obvious. So again, here, you got 10 here, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's actually -14 for number 5. But then they say, how far is A from 0? Absolute value. It's just going to be 14. So I'll leave that worksheet for you to practice. And then there's this worksheet. So this is less about number lines and more about solving problems to see what you get when you've got absolute value. So you work what's inside first. So what's 7 minus 5? It's 2. And the absolute value of 2 is 2. This one right here, if you remember your rules you can't have two negatives touching each other. So you would turn that double negative into a positive. So now you're adding these numbers. So you got -3 and 2. I actually misspoke. The 2 is now positive is what I meant to say. Because you got a negative here and a positive here, you're actually going to be subtracting. So 3 minus 2 is 1. Keep the sign of the larger number, which is -3. Keep your absolute value. Absolute value of -1 is 1. Let's do another one of those. So this one right here, you've got two negatives beside each other. You change that to a positive. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be adding, because this is a negative, this is a positive. So now you're going to be subtracting because they have different signs. So 14 minus 6 is 8. Keep the sign of the larger, it's negative. Absolute value of -8 is 8. So pretty sure that's got an answer sheet as well for you to practice that. And that is the end of the video.